But first, what could have been an unequivocal condemnation of Hamas and memory of October 7 in the Parliament and all the solidarity shown that they could with the Australian Jewish community. All of that didn't happen. It ended. It was a terrible day. We saw that in the Parliament. Joining me now, Sky News contributor Chris Uhlmann. We'll get to other things, Chris, but I've got to ask you what you made of that attempt at a bipartisan motion today, but basically squandered by the Prime Minister.
Oh, I think it's a very sad day when Australia can't get together, when the two sides of politics can't get together in Parliament to do something which should be obvious, and that is to mourn the losses that we saw on October 7 and the atrocities that went with it. I think what we're seeing from the Prime Minister is that he now knows that a large part of his caucus is pro-Palestinian, a large part of the Labor Party's base is pro-Palestinian. He fears what that will do at the next election with the Greens going after that base, a Muslim party now arising, which is going after part of that base. So I think it's the belief in his party which is driving the politics on this, and that's why he's caught between two stools. He can't make up his mind. And you're right to point out too about Labor Party's history on this, and I keep going back to it. In 1947, a hero of the Labor Party, Doc Evatt, was the chair of the UN committee that shepherded through the State of Israel and then was the president of the UN General Assembly, which saw it through, when Australia was the first state to vote on the State of Israel. Now, 80 years on, nearly 80 years on, the first of Israel's supporters now seems to be equivocal about where it stands. And I think that's a very, very difficult thing for the country to be in.
Yeah, I don't disagree with the point you're making there about the shift in his base, or certainly the shift in his caucus. But the more he goes down this track, the more he displays how weak he is as a leader, that he can't stand up for what's right and what's wrong. I think he leaves himself open to ordinary Australians. We see it in the polls. We saw it in the polls even yesterday about the lack of support for these protests. He leaves ordinary Australians with nowhere to go on the Prime Minister's support. You know, they're not going to vote for a bloke that they see as ostensibly weak.
Yeah, well, it says it in Revelations, doesn't it, Peter? If you're neither hot nor cold, then I'll spit you from my mouth. And that's the problem that he has. And I think in these sorts of circumstances, the best thing that you can do is pick and stick. And I don't know that it's a difficult thing for an Australian government to decide that it's going to stand with the only state in that part of the world which is a democracy and has been a long-term friend of Australia. Now, there are really difficult issues, and we've discussed this before too, in the way that Benjamin Netanyahu has behaved in the big miss of the Israeli Defence Forces and its security on October 7. And the thing I fear most now is that it's now fighting in the south of the country and the north of the country. And if it wants to clear the land to get rid of Hezbollah, it's got to go at least 40 kilometres inland, and it can only do that with troops. So Israel now faces an existential threat, and it's going to need all the friends that it can get, and Australia should be one of those friends.
Is the Labor right dead, Chris Uhlmann?
Well, look, it's changed. The party has changed so dramatically, and the thing it's changed so dramatically in my lifetime. I used to joke that when I was growing up, I didn't know anyone who wasn't Catholic and didn't vote Labor. It's just not the crowd that I used to move in, that all the Catholics were essentially members of the Labor Party, that my family were. That was our background, but they were kind of more of that working class, that blue-collar stock. And we saw it start in the 1970s with the Don Dunsons and the Gough Whitlams, where they started courting a crowd which was more of a white-collar worker. So now there's this massive divide between the Labor Party as it was and the Labor Party that it is at the moment. And to me, on some things, it's unrecognisable because I just really don't know where it stands anymore. And I think that there are a lot of working-class people who are essentially more conservatives, particularly socially, that would be asking the same question.
Mm. Yeah, this will be the debate in the election, where that old Labor vote is going to go, and that I think will determine things, particularly for Peter Dutton, won't it?
Yeah, look, I think that the question beyond a shadow of a doubt at the next election is going to be the cost of living. And I think that people might see some of what's going on at the moment as a distraction from the things that they want people to be talking about. I think both leaders really should, at some point, getting back to talking about the cost of living. But on matters of principle, and this is a matter of principle, you would expect, both sides to make their positions particularly clear. Peter Dutton, look, he has the clarity of a very clear position. Adam Bandt has the clarity of a very clear position. The Prime Minister at the moment doesn't have any clarity at all, and because of that, he's vanishing into the background, and it's pretty hard to vote for a shadow. Yeah, it comes down to backbone and conviction, mate, and he hasn't got it. We'll leave it there. We'll speak to you next week.